Wow, Jeffersonian Democracy Part 1 was so fun. Welcome now to Jeffersonian Democracy Part 2. Only in this case, we're talking about nationalism, the spirit of America. And what could be better than the spirit of America? Don't answer that. Many things, perhaps, like graham crackers and frosting. I don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about nationalism in this section and the American spirit. So, very quickly, the definition is this idea of a spirit of national consciousness or a national oneness. What does it mean to be American? Now that the United States exists, and now skipping ahead to the War of 1812, now that we know it's going to exist, what are we going to do? Well, we've proven that America is capable of defending herself. Thank you, War of 1812. And with the death of the Federalists, wait, what? The death of the Federalists? Stay tuned for Jeffersonian Democracy Part 3, when we'll talk about the War of 1812. Now there's no real sort of sectionalism. There's not a lot of states' rights movement feeling right now. We're just kind of like everyone's feeling really good about being in the United States of America. And there's the decline of economic and political dependence on Europe. We're turning our focus westward. Westward. So, nationalism has to also demonstrate itself in literature, art, and architecture. Let's find out. Literature, the thing you don't read much anymore. We start with the Romantic period. You can also go earlier into this. Your book talks about James Fenimore Cooper. And as does this slide, they also talk about some other writings a little bit earlier on. Daniel Webster's dictionary to make an American style of spelling. When you get all the extra U's and S's out of there, Great Britain. Come on now. But this is the first great literary generation of America. The protagonists were often haunted, alienated, sometimes larger than life. You can see the effects of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 and the scars of living on the frontier in many ways. James Fenimore Cooper is writing in upstate New York about the West, which was upstate New York, the pioneers and the last of the Mohegans. His grandfather is the person whom Cooperstown was named for, Baseball Hall of Fame. Nathaniel Hawthorne is sitting there in New England, internalizing a lot of angst and judgment. He writes the Scarlet Letter about the Puritans, the House of the Seven Gables. Herman Melville is meanwhile busy writing a book no one pays any attention to at the time called Moby Dick and One's Obsession and the Dangers of Individualism, Driving Society to Ruin. No one pays any attention to it until later in the 19th and 20th century when someone actually finally publishes the one that has the ending and everyone realizes what happened. And everyone said, hey, this is a great book. And of course, not just Edgar Allan Poe, and The Raven, and other tales of romanticism and haunting and spiritualism all start to create an American literature for which students will be forever grateful. What about poetry? Poetry? Henry Wadsworth Longfellow sounds like a British poet, but he's not. He's an American poet. He writes Paul Revere's Ride. Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight. That's really long and completely made up. Paul Revere didn't really make it. He got caught and stuck at a tavern. The other guy did. Look into it. And the Song of Hiawatha, of course, romanticizing the idea of connection of Native Americans and the idea of a new world, a new spirit in the United States. Ralph Waldo Emerson begins the process of thinking and making thinking not be as fun as it sounds. He writes The Transcendentalist. He starts the Transcendentalist movement, which we'll get into later. We have John Greenleaf Whittier's Legends of New England in Prose and Verse. What does it mean to really be an American? What is New England like versus England? And Oliver Wendell Holmes is writing things like Old Ironsides and The Last Leaf. So poetry is abounding in America as well. It's not just for British folks anymore. And what about art, you may ask yourself? Art in the 19th century, early 19th century, reflected themes of discovery and exploration and settlement. They focused on the aesthetics of the sublime and landscapes, how America as a continent was unlike anything in Europe. And so there were two schools in this way. There was the Hudson River School that takes place along the upstate New York. Again, this is going to be a factor. See economic development in the Erie Canal. Takes place on the Hudson River area where people like Thomas Cole and Albert Bierstadt are drawing painting amazing landscapes like this with these sort of heavenly images of light and vast, impressive landscapes. And Winslow Homer, of course, will also be doing this in New England, primarily around the coast and Cape Cod and ships and oceans and sailing. But not to be outdone, some people said, let's go farther west and let's go to the Rocky Mountains. Now that Lewis and Clark have proved that you can go there and come back, let's look at the Rocky Mountains and let's talk about Thomas Moran and the Rocky Mountain School, which are basically doing the same thing the Hudson River School is doing, just at a much higher elevation. Not like artistically, just a much higher elevation. Also, go ahead and take a look at the DeYoung's website. They have multiple paintings of the Hudson River School and the Rocky Mountain School in their collection if we could go there. Actually, the DeYoung is open, so you can go there. Wear a mask. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget architecture, because people got to live in buildings. And so we're going to move away from the Georgian style that emulated Great British architecture towards a more neoclassical style. Remember, the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, people at that time were super into ancient Greeks and Romans, particularly in government and in style. And so we have the neoclassical Greek revival style. Let's take a look at some other examples of that. Georgian on the left, otherwise known as Colonial Williamsburg, and neoclassical revival on the right, Jefferson's Monticello. Georgian, neoclassical. You're George. Good. Neoclassical. Very nice, ladies and gentlemen. And that concludes our Spirit of Nationalism, Jeffersonian Democracy, Part 2.